You are about to experience Jackson Snyder Presents. We will examine the life of our master Yahshua by discovering his ancestors, family, and friends, by reviewing rare ancient manuscripts, and speaking to those who know him best. From the Vero, Essene, Yahad, now experience Jackson Snyder Presents.
Welcome back to the Vero, Essene, Yahad, and Jackson Snyder Presents. Today we've got part 2 of our Habakkuk Pesher overview. The Habakkuk Pesher is a very controversial text from the Dead Sea Scrolls that we think belongs in the New Testament. What do you think?
These guys were seditioners. They were coming against the government. That's what you got for that. So we've got the next in succession. It was James, the brother of Yahshua. And when he was stoned and thrown off the parapet in 62 AD, that went on to his brother Shimon Zelotes, also known as Shimon the Canaanian or Shimon Bar Cleopa, or several other names, by the way. That's the game, nicknames, code names, aliases, pseudonyms, etc. There's another teaching on that. You'd really enjoy that because you've got all kinds of the same names in there. How do we sort all these people out? Name James, for instance, 150 of them, or there's about 5-6 Jesuses in there too. Second, we have the wicked priest. He's described as a false teacher once trusted by the movement. Priest indicates his class. In fact, he's a high priest. His fate is to be, as I said, according to the Habakkuk Pesher, tortured and killed by his enemies, sliced to people, and thrown off the top of the wall of Jerusalem down on the other side. James, Ananus ben Ananus. The teacher of righteousness is written here that he suffered a very similar fate at the hands of this wicked priest. If it's evidence on the internal side of the text, that's what we need to go with. If it describes events that we know about, for sure, perfectly and in sequence, then that's what event it's talking about. If you try to date it with some method of paleography or a Ouija board or by the expertise of some old Catholic monk, what are you going to get? It's the same as being like a psychic scholar or something. The third protagonist, or I should say antagonist in there, is the lying spouter. This is why we pick through James and Paul. Spouter has to do with boasting. Lying has to do with Paul's constant denial that he's lying. And I wonder, who is he trying to convince that he's not lying? There's only one person, James in the circumcision, because they call him a liar, and they call him an empty or vain man in the epistle of James. If only we had more James letters, but the fact is, we do have more. They're in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Take a look at what is called the Thanksgiving Psalms. If you like James and you know about his history, there's a lot of secular history on him, you can read his autobiography in the Thanksgiving Psalms of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you can do it for $9 or $3. You can get you a book, or ask me for one. The lying spouter is the one who decided, I can't read my writing here. The one who discredits the teacher with lies, boasting and bringing the Torah to naught. And that's what the Pesher says. By the way, a Pesher means a commentary. It's what you all do all the time on Facebook that I can't hardly stand. What you do is you take a scripture from the Bible and you take it out of its context and you try to make it fit into what's happening now or fit into some future sensationalist nonsense, when it really identifies a historical occasion that came to pass that we could boast about ourselves if we only knew history. You still like me? I just dissed you a little bit. Anyway, the boaster, the lying spouter. Next, we've got the house of Absalom. Just the mention of Absalom gives you an idea that this is a traitor house of the house of David. These are, the house of Absalom stands by allowing the liar works against the teacher. So these are ostensibly or purportedly for the teacher of righteousness and his way of doing religion, works, and faith, a very important thing. When you're thinking of eternal salvation and the restoration of Israel, you got to have it one way or the other. Absalom stood for the king, but changed its mind and went over to the other side, the house of Absalom, okay? And next we have the Kittim. In historical prophecy of the Old Testament, Kittim simply mean the powers or armies of the West, Europe primarily, or North Africa. But as you get to the Maccabees and the intertestamental literature, you've got the Kittim standing for the Greeks, because they're a big power at that time. Now, by this time, Kittim, when we read it, stands for Romans, because the Romans are in the land. They're even at the gates of Jerusalem right now, knocking down the walls with great big engines. Then we have one more person in here that's significant but not mentioned much, and that's the righteous priest. Now, I don't know if the righteous priest is James, because he did come from the line of David and Zadok both, through the king Jotham. Jotham had Zadok the priest on one side of his family. In fact, his mother's name was Yerushalayim. And on the other side, he was a scion of David that became king of Judah, and then reigned as king from 25 years of age and on, was a good king. So we've got this blood in all these guys that come out of Mary or Joseph or whoever they come out. I don't even want to get into that. Column 1 of the Habakkuk Pesher. Here is a brief synopsis. Column 1 interprets a passage from Hebakkuk 1 and 2, saying that the Torah is rejected. Why? Because the wicked one swallowed up the righteous teacher through robbery and treachery. James, when you read about him in Acts 21 again, he says, through the elders to Paul, look at all these thousands that have come to be zealots for the Torah. Just read zealots. This is the same thing that we talk about in history of zealots. Look at all these thousands, Paul, that are here that have come in. James was the leader of it. He was the opposition high priest elected by the people to go into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, pray on behalf of the people. Now, how was he able to do that when the regular high priest had to go in there? Obviously, James the Just wasn't on the moon calendar. Duh. James the Just was an Essene. He was on the solar calendar, as was Joshua. The calendar called the Zadokite calendar. Good night. His great-grandfather was given the calendar from Yahweh. Is he going to be on some loony calendar? No way. James the Just had a different Yom Kippur than the rest of them. Even the Sadducees and Pharisees had different dates for the feasts. Not to mention there was a couple more calendars out there. All we got here today, I'm griping about it, these dang calendar creators, causing confusion and nonsense, when you can look right in Ezekiel 44 and it tells you exactly what calendar is going to be kept in the millennium and beyond. The Zadokite, priestly, Davidic calendar. Isn't he supposed to be King David coming back? He's going to be on the Pharisees' moon calendar? What about Matthew 23? Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! But I love your calendar. We always have fun. Hardly. Come on over to the Zadokite calendar. Be in the right place. Millennium is here. It's time to start coming home. Sorry. Second thing, column 2. The Torah is destroyed because the righteous teacher is destroyed by the wicked priest. A miracle comes to pass. We're not told what it is. But it's not acknowledged because the teacher's words were neither believed nor promoted by the man of the lie, that is, the lying spouter, and the traitors to the Torah, technical term, traitors to the Torah, those that followed the man of the lie, and the new covenant of Elohim, also called the new covenant in the land of Damascus. We say, what's in Damascus? Isn't that where Paul's let down in a basket? It's what Damascus means, not where it's at. Damascus, cup of blood. What do we know about the cup of blood? I leave that up to you. They say the new covenant in Damascus. What are they talking about? The home of King, what I mentioned his name a little earlier. I can't remember it now. No. Cup of blood, Damascus. Think about it. So here we have Paul coming on the stage, the lying spouter, the man of the lie, his band of traitors. Well, we have Barnabas. Barnabas, was he a traitor? He finally left. It says in the Acts he left Paul over Mark. But was that the case? What happened to Silvanus or Silas or in Hebrew, Zillah? What happened to him? And what happened? Communion properly done in accordance with the Didache and the Messianic banquet of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Where is the blood of Yahshua, the bloody cup? Is it floating in the air someplace that we can just call on the blood of Jesus? No. He did something at Passover, and it wasn't a Passover meal. He gave us a movable feast, whereas if it were promoted in the way that he gave it, which is recorded in the Didache, unto the Davidic kingdom to come through Messiah, yes, that's where we get our sustenance. Now, can you prove that theologically? I'm sure I can, but I can certainly prove it experientially. Thank you for that comment. So we have this man of the lie who wouldn't follow the new covenant in the land of Damascus, that defiled, look, it says that this man of the lie defiled his holy name. I told you Paul wrote in Greek. There's no way in hell that he wrote in Aramaic, no matter what your Hebrew roots guru says. He did not. He did not address anybody that was a Hebrew in his letters. They're all Romans and some Greeks. But look, what name does he use? Theos, Jesus Christos, or Christus Jesu. Don't you think that he sat down with James the Just and talked about his brother? Don't you think that Paul knew how to, excuse me, I got a little excited about that.
This is the kinder, gentler Jackson.
He sat down with James and talked about James' brother, Yeshua. Would he be calling him Jesus Christos? No, I don't think so. The problem is with that name Jesus, as I've tried to explain 100 times to these gurus on the web that think they know so much about the Greek language and how pagan it is. There is no other way to transliterate the name Yahshua to Greek than the way it is in the New Testament. There's no other way. Okay, I've got an audio on that. You can go listen to it. I'm not going to get into it. I've got to get this done here. I've got another 15 minutes. Column 2, number 2. The traitors to the last days. Such are violent people, it says, who have broken the new covenant in Damascus. They don't believe prophecy of the righteous priest regarding the events to happen in the last generation. The last generation is a code word. There's a prophecy in the Yahad rule in Dead Sea Scrolls. And that prophecy is 40 years after the righteous teacher dies, the day of the Lord, the day of Yahweh, comes to pass with the destruction of Jerusalem. It's like Revelation is not about the destruction of the earth. So mistranslation in there, the word Gaia is not meaning earth. It means land. It's talking about the land of Israel. Revelation is all about Israel and Rome, not about the United States or Red China. What was going on there was a prophecy that came forth on the Mount Olivet that a generation won't pass, or this generation will live to see it all. Prophetic generation being 40 years. Prophecy given by the righteous teacher. 30 AD, 70 AD. Here we have 40 years later, one generation. The prophecy is fulfilled, where we have the destroyers of Jerusalem, and overhead over the city, while the battle is going on in the sky, chariots and swords and seraphim and fire and blazes and lights coming down and UFOs. All this is reported by Josephus, and even the Roman Tacitus reports the same thing. Okay, I crack you up. And when they heard that he spake in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more. Don't you think he could speak Hebrew if he was down there in Jerusalem? Of course he could. He knew the Greek philosophers. But there's no way that he wrote in Hebrew. Not a chance. Do you think that Epaphroditus and Nero and the rest of them could read Hebrew? No more than you can. I can't either. But I can read Greek. And so could they. All right, so we have this prophecy coming out of Olivet, and the same exact prophecy coming out of the Yahad rule, which says after the righteous teacher dies, about 40 years before this all comes to pass. So the teacher of righteousness, who maybe in this case was Yeshua or maybe James, has given forth this prophecy that Paul and them and the traders will not accept. They won't accept it, and we look in the Thessalonians, and we see that they don't accept it. They think that what's going to happen is that these saints or the people who believe in Paul's gospel or whatever, I'm not sure, are going to rise up in the air. But first, everybody of the dead is going to all come up, and they're going to go up in the rapture. And Paul is immediate about this. This is going to happen any time now. And there's a disappointment about it. But if you read the epistle of Barnabas, you know that Barnabas knew exactly where he was in time. He knew he was at the beginning of the 5th millennium, and he knew and wrote when the millennium was going to come, 2,000 years. So Paul doesn't believe what's happening to what the scroll calls the last generation. This priest, too, has the ability and likeness to interpret all the former prophets. So we have this particular, not a wicked priest, but a good priest. And I think they're talking about Yahshua HaMashiach here. Because James has just died, and they're looking back at this prophecy from 40 years before. Who else could it be? What I'm saying about this is, they can't fit this prophecy or this Pesher, this commentary, in any place in the past where they have used their magic to try to figure out the date on it. There's no history there that has anything to do with the Romans. The only place it fits is here, 69 A.D., or a little after. Column 2, number 3. Part of the prophecy is that the Kittim are on their way with vast armies to kill a multitude and bring Israel into their empire. And the same fate awaits for all the nations to the ends of the earth. That means to the Euphrates River. When you read that in the scripture, Euphrates and Nile, those are the ends of the earth. These Kittim are evil. They don't consider or believe the Torah. It's a primary thing that makes them evil. But they don't believe the Torah because they're polytheists. Their gods are brutal. And the Romans and the Greeks, they would be better men if they just had better gods. Go to column 4, 3. These Kittim are dreadful to all nations. They plan their evil conquest in advance in a council. The Pesher is talking about a senate here, where you have an emperor, a leader, sitting before other people that are counselors, but the Senate has no power in the Roman Empire. The only person with the power is the emperor. He can say yea or nay to anything in the Senate. Whatever they decide, they decide will come to pass only with, at this point, the Emperor Nero's say-so. So they are smart, the Pesher says, and they're deceitful as well as being powerful. This host consists of cavalry and pack animals by the myriads. They're coming up from their lands in the east to swallow up all Cha'am, the people. Here we have the concept of swallowing that comes up all the time. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is an archenemy, an evil spirit called Belial. And in Paul's writing, it's Beliar. And in the Old Testament, it's something like Balaam. The BLM root in Hebrew talks about swallowing. And in the Damascus document, in the scrolls, it talks about the 3 nets of Belial, whereas the nets are cast out. One is pollution of the temple, one is fornication, one is riches. Belial casts them out and brings the nets in order to eat consume, swallow the populace. In the Pesher, over and over again, the word bel is used in the manner of the Belial, or the swallowing. We find it in the New Testament, even in the Greek. It translates over to Greek with the idea of, like in Mark chapter 3, ekbalo, out, balo, cast. Yahshua is cast into the wilderness to meet the devil there. Or the demons in Mark 5, casting out demons, ekbalo bao, to cast out, cast or swallow. This word plays an important part throughout the scrolls and the New Testament. You find it everywhere. So we have the Kittim coming up, and we go to column 4. They have no respect for the honorable rulers of nations, kings or administrators. They take even large armies without seriousness. Walled cities are no match for them. They use machines to knock them down, including the fortresses. Speaking of the fortress of the people, it's talking about with the word people, or Ha'am, the Herodian fortresses. We're talking about Macarius, right? Masada, Herodian. Oh, what's that other one? Starts with a P. 13 emerods, for anybody to get the one. Phi Celeste, you're too late. I already got it. It's another one. 5 of them, I think. They're knocking down these fortresses, and they ended up the war in Masada, where Josephus says there was just a few hundred left, and they took their own lives rather than to be subjected to the sexual and degrading morality and tortures of the Romans. Took their own lives. They actually found the chits that they used with the names painted on them. Isn't that amazing? We go to Act 4. Did we do that? Okay, yeah, we did. They surrender them until they surround them until they surrender. They destroy them on account of... And they enslave everyone that they don't kill. This is exactly what Titus did. Josephus tells the whole story. He was right there, working as a translator for the Romans. When this all happened, he writes it all down. It's an exciting story, but I'll tell you, it's the worst, most bloody thing concerning war and the horrible things that happened there that I ever heard of. And this policy is continued through the passage of one leader to another throughout their council. What the Pesher is saying is that in 69 AD, there were 3 emperors. When Nero was killed by his freedman Epaphroditus, Paul's friend, after that, there was a rush for emperorship. There was nobody left over there to take over. Otho came in from Portugal. Then we've got, the first one was the General Galba from Spain. He comes in last 3 months. The Praetorian Guard kills him because he won't give him a raise. Next comes Otho from Portugal. What did they call it in those days? Lusitania. Otho comes in. He's a friend of Nero. He's a pervert. But he's a good administrator. So he comes in, he spends a few months there, and he's powerless, and he ends up with them all coming after him, and he kills himself. Rome is in disarray at this time, and finally, the third guy comes in with huge armies, General Vitellius. And Vitellius says to his armies, like, you've been out here in the field in Germany all these years, and in Britain and all these horrible places. Go in there and get anything you want in Rome. I'm going to the palace. So Vitellius just lets his army swarm through Rome and tear it up, just like this says. And he's swarming with Vespasian and Titus in Jerusalem at the same time. Both places are in the midst of civil war. Both places are burning at the same time. And Revelation reports it that way. Exactly. That's why nobody can figure out who this whore of Babylon is. The city set on the 7 hills. Both are on 7 hills. It's both of them because they are both on fire at the same time. Sorry. Next we have column 5, the destruction of the people by the nations. They're just a tool, the nations are. It is by the chosen one, that is the Bakar, the elect one, who will punish the evil of his own people because they kept the commandments only when convenient. The Pesher is telling there's the Bakar one, the chosen one, and Enoch talks about the Bakar one all the time, the chosen one, son of man, the one that is to bring retribution on sinners and to cast the Kataim into the pits and the Malakim into the pits.
You are into Jackson Snyder Presents, a presentation of the Vero Essene, Yahad, and Hebrew Nation Radio. It's time to take a short break. We'll be right back.
Hey, Dad, what's happening on Jackson Snyder Presents next week? Well, son, we got the Slavonic Josephus, talking about them apostles, and we got some exegesis problems, like nickname, code name, surname, aliases, and even the pseudonyms. Hey, Dad, you need to put your teeth in. I can't understand what you're saying. Then we got the story of the 500 drunken elephants from 3rd Maccabees. That's going to be a real good story. Then we're going to have us a highbrow concept, something called illustrious themes having to do with piano playing. Then we got the double numbers coming up, that is the numbers of the scripture and what they mean, and then we got this book we call Numbers, and some people call it Babyball. Now I get it, Dad. And finally next weekend, we got the entire book of Tobit done in dramatic fashion. Hope you like that. Kids will like it, I know. Yeah, Dad, I know I like it. See you there now. Yeah, I'm going to be there. Bye.
It is by the chosen one, that is the Bakar, the elect one, who will punish the evil of his own people because they kept the commandments only when convenient. And exalt the Zadikim and Bakarim and Kadoshim to the places that they belong in glory. And the righteous one was punished. The word in the Pesher is swallowed again. This house, that is the assembly or the church, they're talking about a church assembly here. This house didn't help him, even though the liar rejected the Torah in the very midst of the assembly. So we got something we don't really have history of unless it happened in Antioch and Calaroa, and that is that Paul and the lying spouter with the house of Absalom there came forward and he said, we cannot preach circumcision to these Gentiles who have riches and they're affluent and they are not Hebrew. They don't understand this. It's against the law for them. We've got to go beyond that. And he says if you break Torah in one aspect, you break it in all. And he says that to justify his own behavior as he goes forth out of Judaism into my gospel, the law of Christos Jesus, which I don't know what that is. I don't think he really tells anywhere. The house, that is assembly or church, didn't help him when the liar got up and rejected the Torah in the very midst of the assembly. That's not word for word, but that's exactly what the Pesher says. It's hard to read. You can read it, though. I've got it out there for you. Column 6. The Kittim. Here we come, the Romans now. They're devouring the people, again swallowing the people year by year with their taxes. The mark of the beast in Revelation chapter 13 says you can't buy or sell without it, and it's on the forehead or hand, and at that time it's got the number 666, number of a man, name of a man. In 68 AD, the requirement was if you wanted to buy or sell, you had to have a stamp on your person, on your hand, your head, your goods. On that stamp was the name Nero, Kaiseros Nero, in the year 68 AD, whatever it is in Roman parlance. The name adds up, of course, to 666, and it was entirely illegal to buy or sell anything without the tax stamp. And the tax was so high that it was swallowing up the poor people. Did you know that the poor people even the middle-class people, did not eat meat in Israel? Why? Because they were good New Age vegetarian Essenes? Not at all. If they grew meat, they sold it for taxes. They couldn't afford to eat meat. That was the big draw on the feasts. Meat for everybody then. Everybody ate meat, but on every other day, even if you raised goats, you didn't kill the fatted calf in those days. You sold it for taxes. What you ate were pickled or dried sardines and minis for your meat. Otherwise, you ate legumes, figs. As Slavonic Josephus says, the Nazarenes ate tree food, whatever that is. Taxes. They sacrificed their standards. The Roman army, this is obviously seen by the Pesherist. They took their standards with pictures of their emperor, pictures of their generals on it, and they literally took them into the city and they worshiped those standards. This is all spoken of in Josephus, how this happens, and the uproar and hubbub that came because of these Romans bringing their standards and their golden eagle into Jerusalem. They worship their standards and they worship their weapons. Listen to Tacitus, the Roman historian that tells us all about this. He learned that these Roman soldiers didn't get paid anything. They got their money in plunder. And there was hardly an Italian that came down to Israel. The troops were from Mauritania, from Africa, from Afghanistan, from Britain, from Gaul, from Germany. Plenty of Germans, especially the Praetorian Guard. They didn't put Italians down there. They put these barbarians down there, you see, to get plunder. So they had a scorched earth policy, shock and awe against Israel, that Revelation talks about. Look what Revelation says about the trees. It says the third of the trees were destroyed, and then half of the trees were destroyed, and then 2/3 of the trees were destroyed. We've got Titus and Vespasian coming down from North Israel, destroying everything in its path, burning every tree or using it for field works or machines, burning every village, killing every animal, killing every person, man, woman, child, baby. Destroying every boat on the water, destroying every farm, every tree, every bit of vegetation, every field was burned and destroyed. Every city that was walled was knocked down and entirely destroyed. Everybody in it was killed, unless you surrendered. If you surrendered, you got to go into slavery. All right? That's how they did war. Maybe we ought to do some more like that. The wars would be a lot shorter that way, I'm sure. And to get to Jerusalem, they're 2/3 of the way down. That's what Revelation is all about. Okay, sorry. Column... Oh, I want to get the right one. We're getting through them. We're almost done. Column 6. They used their weapons to spare no one, not even children in the womb. We already know that from Herod's stuff in Bethlehem years before, but Herod, of course, was raised in Rome and raised in the palace of the Romans, and all those Herods were raised up there. They were all Romans, even though they came from Arabia. So Josephus tells an incredible story inside the temple when the Romans get in there, and they're in the temple, and they're killing everybody, of course, and a boy pops out. And the boy asks for the right hand of fellowship with the Roman soldier he sees there. And he says, "Why should I give you the right hand of fellowship?" He said, "Because I'm your enemy, and I need a little water." "I haven't had any water," the child says. And so the Roman gives him a little bit of water. And he drinks it, and the Roman wants to befriend the child, but of course the child calls him a name and runs off. And the Roman says, "Why did you do that to me? I gave you water." And of course, the kid smarts off. I can't remember what. But that's the way it was there. I mean, everything was even in the temple, mingled together, death and fire and destruction everywhere. And the temple was, of course, destroyed. Habakkuk is a prophecy about the righteous teacher, according to the Pesher. A later vision will come about, it says, of the appointed time. These will surely come to pass. The mystery of Elohim. That is, the form in which the prophecy will come to pass. They don't know. It's the mystery. But it's about the man of truth, whoever that is. Then it says, according to the man of truth, doers of the Torah. I got to share with you where the word Essene comes from. It's not from Greek. It doesn't mean saints. It's from Hebrew. Osei. Osei becomes Essene in Greek. Osei is an infinitive, I'm told by my friend Adam, infinitive for to do. So when we see the phrase in the Dead Sea Scrolls, doers of the Torah, over and over and over again, then we realize maybe these are Essenes at Qumran, because they call themselves doers, which is Essene, or Osane. So we have a little bit of proof right here concerning the doers of the Torah. All right, The Essenes will not slow down until the fulfillment of this prophecy finally comes. The righteous will live by faith. Here it is quoted from Hebakkuk. But the unrighteous will be dismayed by final judgment. Let me tell you, inside Jerusalem, when this day of Yahweh came, there weren't any righteous people. These were horrible people in there, what was left of them. Of course, like I said, hundreds of thousands died of starvation and every other deprivation that you can possibly imagine within Jerusalem. No way to get out, no food. The head of the Sicarii burned the food storage, which would have lasted years. He burned it all, so there'd be more immediacy about fighting the Romans. So people were eating each other. There's a story of Josephus about how a mother ate her baby, ate half of it. And there were so many people trying to get food there that they smelled the cooking of that on the fire, and she wrapped the other half up. And the bandits came in to get whatever she was eating, and she said to the bandits, "I'm glad you came because I saved the best part for you." Opened up the blanket to the half-eaten child. It's the most pathetic story in all of the Wars of the Jews by Josephus. And of course, even these starving bandits were sickened by all this and had to run out. Column 8. Doers of Torah, Essene Torah, within the house of Judah, will be saved through works and trust in the righteous teacher. Now the arrogant man, which I'm supposing they're talking about Paul there, he will be betrayed by his rich friends. The people and nations will gather to him. That's true. The wicked priest became rich with booty stolen from the violent men. Remember, Acts, it talks about the poor priests. Those are the Zadokite priests in exile. It talks about in Josephus in different places that these temple priests like Ananus ben Ananus were stealing the wages of these poor rural priests to enrich themselves, and the poor priests out in the provinces there were starving to death. So we're addressing that here. The fact that these priests had stolen from the poor priests and Levites to enrich themselves, and the wicked priests became rich with the booty stolen from those who were the people of the Torah. So he acted in polluting ways. The prophecy is concerning Ananus. The torturers will arise against the high priest. It's got a little more. Doing good. Column 9. The high priest, in 8, will be killed by his detractors. Who killed him? Maybe the Zealots. That was the Nazarene movement in there. That was the Qumran movement, the Zealots that were in Jerusalem. We learned that the people of the way of Yahshua were able to get out of there after the first attack. The Emperor Galba at that time said, anybody that wants to come out can. And this is very early in the war, and they were able to get out, and they went to Pella, which is a city in the Decapolis in the province of Damascus, the Bloody Cup, where they lived in caves for 3 years, and they were allowed to come back, get rich, to spoil the people to get rich. I told you that story, how whatever was left of those priests filed out with Titus and the generals there, and they were given the thumb down, with the exception of Theophilus, dear Theophilus. However, their booty will end up with the Kittim. There's a prophecy that came true. The Kittim, the Romans, took away the temple treasury. Say, where is the treasure of the copper scroll? Well, don't you think that those guys in Rome that were brutal torturers got a hold of some poor guys there and beat the hell out of them and find out where that stuff was? In fact, we've got the Arch of Titus there in Rome still standing, and on that arch in the bas-relief is the chariot with the wonderful, huge, solid gold menorah that Queen Helena, the Nazarene from Adiabene, bought for the temple. Hold off to Rome, and as Eisenman said the other night, what do you think they used that gold menorah for but to finance the Colosseum, the place of slavery and death for the exiles from Judea, and the Nazarenes and Christians in Rome used as night lights on the streets, lit up, put before beasts, made to kill each other and put every kind of torture imaginable in that Colosseum financed by the treasure from the Jewish temple. However, their booty will end up with the Kittim. Judgment is also on account of what the wicked priest has done to the righteous teacher and his council and the elect. And the wicked priest will be tortured for it. So he was, of course, the persecutor of James the Just, had him killed. Ananus ben Ananus was also the in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest. There were 5 high priests from the high priest Annas that's spoken of in the book of Luke, chapter 1 or 2, someplace. 5 of them in a row, and this is one of them, and they were killers of the Nazarenes and any other that might consider themselves messianic figures or in the messianic movement. Why? Because they got their money by controlling the religion there. That's how they made money. That's how they stayed in the high priesthood. And as one of our friends, a Hebrew roots teacher, can't think of his name right now, he got evidence that these high priests held concessions inside the temple for people to buy stuff like aspirins and condoms and little bottles of pop and cigarettes and stuff like that right inside the temple. And that's how they made a lot of money. And they didn't want to bother with that, you know. They don't want to mess that up. Plus making the people buy inferior animals for sacrifice with red paint on them so they would be approved and keep the good animals for themselves. These guys were rotten to the core, just like Krabby Appleton. Victimizing the poor. This is exactly what it says there at the end of column 9. That great destruction will come upon the entire township. Fire. But the main sin is profiteering, victimizing, and taxing the poor. The word poor comes up constantly in James and this document and in Paul. The word is ebionim, and that is what the Nazarenes were called after the destruction of Jerusalem. They went from being the Nazarenes, the guardians. When they were cast out, they could no longer be the guardians. They became the poor. They had nothing. Ebionim. Okay, I think we got one more left. We've got column 10 and 11. Judgment of the one of these characters will be public. Elohim will lead him to judgment and condemn him, whoever that is, to fire. Then is a damning of the person who establishes a township of lawlessness, a kingdom township of lawlessness. We see an anti-Jerusalem. The Essenes believed all of Jerusalem was to be holy. Now we see an anti-Jerusalem kingdom set up in apostasy with none other than the king of that place being the man of the lie, that lying spouter. Those involved with it will ultimately work toward fire judgment, and their works will be worthless. Now I've got it, was the lying spouter who builds this city, unquote, by leading many astray, doing it for his own glory, teaching, quote, lying words of emptiness. James, you empty man. Did James write this? Or was he dead by then? And the lying works spoken of are not just plain old works, not masa in the Hebrew. These are amel works, works of suffering. You remember part of Paul's boasting? I'm not against Paul, come on. His boasting in all his afflictions. I wonder why he's getting beat up and stoned and bled and let down in baskets and all this stuff for preaching the gospel of peace. What in the world is he preaching to get all this? These blasphemed and vilified the elect ones. Remember, the elect ones have a spiritual resurrection. They're chosen from the foundation of the world. I'd like to be that, but I know I don't have a chance. The Bakar, the elect, the Yahshua HaMashiach, certainly the bloodline of James and these Zadokite priests that were holy and set apart, and maybe Oni Carlson, because he's really set apart and he's got a great Torah thing going and he's keeping it. I'm never going to make that. I hope in a way that Paul's right, because the just will live by their faith, all right. But I never learned to be so disciplined with my life except in this stuff. And I don't think it's because I like it so much. I think it's because I got Asperger's syndrome or something. I can't get off of it my whole life. Lying words of emptiness. So we've got a rival city here for Jerusalem that he's setting up. And when again we go to Romans 16 and 1 Timothy 4 and Philippians 2 and see some of these incredible, well-known people that Paul is influencing in and getting into his assembly, how could it be? How could it be? Passion. Well, I kind of see it as a seeker-sensitive thing. You know, this religion was illegal. Got senators there, and I don't know, I see Paul, well, like in the Quo Vadis, the great movie from 1951, I think, with Peter Ustinov as Nero. You gotta see it. It's exactly what I'm talking about here from a Roman perspective. Paul is a little Jewish guy with a big nose and a little bit of hair. He goes around keeping peace, and he's got friends everywhere, and he's at Nero's party showing up, and he's there when Marcus Vinicius wants to marry the little Christian Lydia from Lydia Deborah Kerr, and Paul shows up, and Marcus Vinicius, Robert Taylor gets so mad at him, philosopher, you're nothing but a fake, and all this stuff, and Paul is just a little guy and so demure, and he's a Jewish rabbi, and all these people are listening to him. He's always smiling, and I know he gets lots of offerings. Get that movie. I got it. I'll send it over to you. It's worth watching. Okay, I'm almost done. I got one more paragraph, all right? The lying spouter and his, here's the word used, Gnosis, his wisdom, Gnosis. Read Colossians chapter 2 if you want to read a Gnostic gospel. Did Paul write that? If Paul wrote that and he meant it, he's definitely a Gnostic. Because that chapter just, when I really got into it about a month ago, and I was amazed at what it says and why the heresiologists didn't call that out. The lying spouter and his Gnosis will be revealed, that which made them drunk and looked on their private parts. Why would he be the one looking on their private parts? Again, it boils down to that great friction between these two sects, and that is circumcision. The Pesher says the lying spotter was always concerned with people's private parts. I didn't say that. The wicked priest now is mentioned, who pursues the teacher of righteousness to swallow him up in venomous anger. It almost sounds like what it says in Acts concerning Paul, who is in murderous rage. Murderous rage. Swallow him in the house of exile. And again, the word there is galut. And I'm telling you that James is writing to the galut and Paul is writing to the galut, and they're both vying for the galut, which is not necessarily Greeks in there, but exiles. Exiled Israelis or those in the galut, in the exile. Swallowing them up. This on the Day of Atonement to cast them down, but the high priest will be shamed in the face of his esteem because his heart wasn't circumcised. The cup of wrath, compared to the cup of blood, will swallow him. The violence of Lebanon. Lebanon, in the scrolls and sometimes in the scriptures. Lebanon is a key symbolic word for the temple in Jerusalem. And that is because, you might remember the fellow that was the king of Jerusalem, Hiram. Hiram came down, Solomon paid him for all kinds of building materials. So they call the temple Lebanon. The cup of wrath will swallow him. The violent of Lebanon will overwhelm you. Speaking of the wicked priest, and again, I mentioned to you that that's exactly what happened in 69 AD when they sliced that guy up. The zealous from the Torah, stuck behind that wall, waiting to be killed and destroyed by the Romans by the hundreds of thousands and millions, and off the bloody Ananus goes with his money and power wasted and destroyed over the wall into the slimy, bloody ditch out on the outside. Okay, children, my time, I went over a little bit. The rest of the story's out there on 2 other ones, or you can go to the Hebrew Nation Radio site out there at veroyahad.org, and it's on radio programs too, because I'm going to play this next week. Well, tell me, did you get something out of that? I know I'm a pretty tongue-tied old fellow. All right. Well, that's all right. I think this is being recorded. Sure. What I do is I'll take the spaces and the ums and oohs and all that crap out, so it'll be down about half the size. But look, I know people that said, why is it that I want to come out there on that site and sit around if you're going to record it? I'll tell you why. Because I wouldn't be doing this if you weren't here. It's important to have an audience. Amen. Love you guys. Shalom.